right, I think we'll get started. All righty, so welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this Friday afternoon. Hopefully you're getting some good hydrating rain in your area. I'm Jocelyn Maffin, and I work with Spinal Cord Injury BC, and you have arrived and found yourself at the first day of our STI forum on weight management. And we all really appreciate you spending your time here with us. And my colleague Terry, who is the brains of this operation, she is behind the scenes today, and she will be hosting tomorrow. And Terry is sort of keeping her perspective on the making sure people get connected and have, the information you need. So if you get confused, you can always message Terry. She's Terry T in this chat. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about why we're doing a forum on weight management. Why this? Why now? Because I think weight and staying healthy and making good choices and all those things are always in our culture, always in the media, on social media. And the reason it came to us is about a year ago, a clinician at GF Strong came to us and said, I have a few clients who could use some more support and ideas on how to manage their weight in a healthy way, and felt that there weren't a lot of options in the community to refer those people to, options that would be cognizant of the barriers that people with spinal cord injury face in being active and eating healthy, preparing food, etc. And so we had a good solid think about that and realized that we weren't sure we knew exactly how to approach this either. And so as part of this, we've been thinking a lot about weight management at SCIBC and how we could approach this. This forum is a reflection of that and kind of an introduction to a future weight management peer support, peer coaching program that we're starting in the new year. And it reflects all of the core components that we see are so important. Talking about behavior change, about being active and moving, about nutrition, and about approaching it from a medical perspective as well. We all have lots of complications and lots of sort of medical realities we have to live with. So those are the four perspectives we're sort of approaching it from. But I also wanted to share through this process, we've learned a few core values as we approach something that can be as sensitive as weight management. We come at everything from a peer-to-peer perspective. And that means we approach this from an equal perspective of everyone has something to learn and something to offer. Other values include acceptance of each other, mutual support, respect, and learning. And so we hope that everyone feels welcome here and that everyone respects each other and wherever you come from in approaching this topic. So without too much further ado, I just hope everyone feels comfortable to ask questions. If you're confused or stuck technologically, message Terry. And here we go. So it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Heather Gainforth. Dr. Gainforth is an ICORD principal investigator and associate professor at UBC Okanagan up there in Kelowna, and a Michael Smith Health Research Scholar. Oh, there's so much in your bio, Heather.
You can just say whatever you like, Jocelyn.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you that Heather does a whole lot of really fun and exciting work about evidence-based behavior change research, and that is how we as humans can change our behavior and how we can all work together in partnership around SCI research and research in general. and how we work together as teams. There's my best paraphrase. And Dr. Gainforth leads the SSHRC-funded research partnership that co-developed the first integrated knowledge translation guiding principles for conducting spinal cord injury research in partnership. And you can find that on iktprinciples.com. It's actually pretty fun. You should totally look at it. Full disclosure, we are her partners in that project. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Heather Gainforth.
Oh, thank you, Jocelyn. It's always such a special moment when I get to interact with SCIBC, as well as lots of people that I care about so much. So we're going to go on a little bit of a journey today. I thought it's Friday night. We got to do this in a really fun way. And maybe put our detective hats on and how we think about the science of behavior change. I thought it's 4 o'clock on a Friday. You might not want to dive deep into the science of behavior change. So maybe we can do this in a way that feels a little bit like a Friday night murder mystery. So that's the approach we're going to take. And I'm happy for you to stop and ask me questions, but it sounds like we'll do more of an in-depth time at the end. So we'll get going from there. So I'd like to begin by gratefully acknowledging that I am on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Silk Okanagan people, based on the beautiful shores of Lake Okanagan. And I am a woman of white settler ancestry, and I'm committed to the process of truth and reconciliation, both here in my home, in my community, in my research partnerships, as well as in my teaching here at UBC Okanagan. And I also would like to take this moment to acknowledge that you're likely joining us from many different lands today. And if you would like to acknowledge those lands in the chat, you're welcome to. So with that, I thought I would tell you that I run 2 kind of key pieces to my research program. So I run the Applied Behavior Change Lab, or the ABC Lab at UBC Okanagan. And I also have the distinct pleasure of being one of the leads on the Integrated Knowledge Translation Guiding Principles project. The guiding principles aim to ensure that when we do research with people with spinal cord injury, that research is relevant, useful, and usable. And that when we do it, that we partner in a really meaningful, respectful, equitable way. And that approach to research means that when I do my research, I ask partners, people that can use my research, a key question. Essentially, I ask, how can I help? And most often when I ask, how can I help? The question really more recently has been about research partnerships when I work with Spinal Cord Injury BC or Spinal Cord Injury Ontario, different groups across North America. But it was really fun today to be asked in terms of how can I help? Terry said, you could help by helping us understand how we can use science to change our behavior. So that actually is my original background. I'm a behavioral scientist. I'm interested in why people do what they do. And I have a background in essentially behavior change science and theory to help us explain why we do what we do. And then I use that to develop interventions. So for our Friday night murder mystery, we're going to talk about 3 key things about the science of changing your behavior. So first, we're going to start around the idea of misconceptions about changing our behavior. So we often have some implicit hunches, our own ideas of, what would change my behavior? Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. And I'll tell you a little bit about what those misconceptions can be. Then I'll share some tools that I use to develop programs to help people change their behavior, including these tools. We've used them in interventions, in research, in work directly with SCIBC. So maybe you get to see a little bit behind the curtain today with these different tools. And then I hope we can have a discussion about how we could use these tools to help you change your own behavior if that's something you're interested in doing. So let's start with misconceptions about changing our behavior. So I really like this quote. The habits that took years to build do not take a day to change. So changing behavior is very difficult. There are scientists all over the world that are trying to understand how we can support people to change their behavior. And what I can promise you is it's not necessarily easy to do. And so if you've tried to change your behavior many times and felt like you failed or it didn't work so well, or you learned some things, but you maybe have fallen off the wagon, don't be too hard on yourself, because behavior changes is really difficult. And I think that we need tools in our toolbox to be able to actually address behavior change. So let's talk about why we often think that behavior change is actually easy. So if you talk to people about behavior change, or you watch an ad on YouTube or an infomercial in the middle of the night, they're going to tell you, don't worry, buy now. Changing your behavior is so simple. All you need are these few little things. But we make common mistakes when we think about changing our behavior. And one of the first ones that these two authors actually nicely outlined for us is that we usually think that behavior change is just common sense. So understanding human behavior is just so obvious that it needs little or no serious thought. We're doing things all the day. And if we just act with our common sense, we could change our behavior. But if it was actually that simple, then we would all just be making good choices all of the time, and whenever we wanted. And we know that that's not the case. It's not actually just so simple to figure out how you change your behavior and how you work with your own psychology. It's not that simple. We also tend to misconceive that it's just about getting the message across. So changing our health behavior is simply a matter of packaging the message right. If I just tell it to you the right way, of course you'll change your behavior. We think about this like commercial advertising. If we just sell the behavior change right, you'll be able to do this, right? If I make it exciting enough, if I make it persuasive enough, I can convince you to do this. And certainly persuasion is important, but that's not all of it. And it's not just so simple to tell someone, oh, you should really think about doing this. Here's all the benefits, or here's all the costs. It's harder than that, or more complex, maybe. Another one is that we think knowledge and information are what drives behavior. So this usually happens when someone starts to shit on you. You know what you should do. You know what you should think about. You really should start being more physically active. You really should start eating X, Y, or Z. And we think if we just tell people, of course, they'll change their behavior. And at that kind of thinking often doesn't really get people to change. If you ask people what they should be doing, usually they can tell you. Usually they can tell you that they need to change their diet, or that they need to change their exercise. Sometimes they do need a little information along the way, but that's not the full story. We often, along that, think that people act rationally. So if we tell them what they need to do, they will be sensible and they will be logical. And after critical and rational appraisal of what we've just told us, or told them, they will come to the conclusion that they absolutely should change their behavior. But changing our smoking behavior, changing our eating behavior, changing our alcohol consumption, our physical activity, those are practices and processes that are embedded in our social lives, that are embedded with triggers, with cues, with moments that make it actually really hard for us to just act rationally. But on the same flip side of that, I wouldn't argue that people necessarily are irrational. So it's not that the converse is true. If people don't act rationally all the time, they're also not always irrational. So sometimes people have very clear reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. And you might look at their behavior and judge it from the outside, thinking that's irrational, or they couldn't have possibly thought through this. But maybe they have looked at the cost benefits of what they're doing and decided to do something that is different than what you might do. And I think that really nicely lies back or calls back to what Jocelyn was saying about acceptance. So what I choose to do and what you choose to do could be very different. And that's okay. The other one is that we can predict behavior accurately. So as a behavioral scientist, I can say if you have this, 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 and this with 100% accuracy, you're going to do X. And it's not that simple. Much like predicting the weather, there's so many factors that go into whether or not it's going to be smoky or rainy or sunny or cloudy. In Kelowna today, there's so many factors that go into whether or not someone will change their behavior. And absolutely, even our most careful models of behavior change can predict to some degree what people will do. There still remains a lot of variance in individual behavior. And telling you if you do these 3 things, you will change your behavior, I can't make that promise today. That said, there's lots of science that we can rely on, and we'll have to sort of put our detective hats on and think about ourselves in between our 2 ears a lot. What's driving each of us as individuals will be slightly different, but I have some things in our toolbox to help us. So given all these assumptions and that we assume it's easy, what most people do when they're trying to design a behavior change intervention, or if I ask most people, why did you decide to get physically active this way? Why did you decide to change your diet that way? Most people, I say, are using the Islagiate principle. And what the Islagiate principle is it seemed like a good idea at the time. So it's not usually based in evidence. Even interventions developed by scientists sometimes haven't been based in the science of behavior change. And often when I ask people, why are you changing your behavior in the way that you are, you're not usually relying on the science of behavior change. And that's our goal for today. Our goal is to actually help you be able to think about changing your behavior using the science of behavior change. And I want to show you some tools. So I did some fun Googling before this, and I found on WikiHow how to make a detective kit. And I appreciated that they told me that the first step is choosing the right bag, assembling disguises, and then getting detective gear. And so I'm going to rely on you to pick your bag and your disguise. But I'm hoping that I can help you with what your detective gear is. So what we're going to put in the bag. And I'll tell you a little bit about what is in my bag as a behavioral scientist and how I approach the question of how do I change my behavior. And so I think while I have hopefully convinced you changing behavior isn't necessarily elementary and that it's super simple, I do think that I can give you 4 elementary steps, 4 ways you can think about starting to approach behavior change. So my first step for you is identify the behavior, or identify the crime, find the crime, identify the behavior, then identify the culprit. Figure out what's stopping you or might be helping you change your behavior, really the stopping part. We're going to think about how we actually solve that crime, and then we're going to review the case. So I'll take you through these 4 steps today so that you can try to apply the science of behavior change to your Friday night murder mystery of how you're going to change your behavior. So the first question I always have to ask people is, do you know what a behavior is? So when we start thinking about behavioral science, behavior is key to that. So behaviors are things that are performed, they're done, they're moved, they're an action by individuals or by groups. They are observable. So I have my little detective glass up here for a reason. I can see you doing a behavior. They can lead to outcomes, so they can lead to changes, but people often confuse them with outcomes. So a good example of this is I can see you exercising. I can see you eating certain foods, but I can't necessarily see the outcomes of how that makes you feel healthier, makes you feel happier. Those things maybe lie between your two ears or in your physiology. Those are your outcomes. But when I'm thinking about behavior change, I want to focus on what I can actually see. So let's look at some examples. Some of these are outcomes or feelings, and some of these are actual behaviors. So if you take a look, maybe make some guesses. It's sort of hard to do guessing on Zoom, but I'll highlight for you in a second which ones are behaviors and which ones are not. I'll give you a second or two, and then maybe I'll change these up for you. So the bullet points in orange are behaviors. The bullet points in blue are not. So managing our weight. Managing our weight is an outcome. That number on the scale is an outcome. Or how our pants feel, or how our clothes feel on our body, those are outcomes. But there's behaviors that change that. One of those below is physical activity. I can see you doing physical activity. There's counseling, right? Going for counseling, visiting a counselor, talking to a peer. That's a behavior. I can see you doing that. Eating fruits and vegetables, that's something I can see. Sleeping, something I can see. Feeling better? No, that's something I could measure, but I can't see you feeling better. Your reduction in your HbA1c, an indicator around diabetes. I can't see that unless I send you for a blood test. That's an outcome of many behaviors. Fasting, so choosing not to eat, that is a behavior. Reduced cravings, not a behavior, the way you feel. Stopping alcohol or cigarettes, behavior. Improved blood pressure, an outcome. Using the Islagiate principle when you are trying to think about behavior change, I would say behavior. But these things essentially are helping us to understand that what I want you to think about is if you want to get to the outcome of managing your weight, you have a long list of behaviors you could think about. And so for today's presentation, yes, we're going to zoom in on managing your weight, but I want you to be mindful that managing your weight is not a behavior. So managing your weight is a number on a scale. And a number on a scale is an outcome of many behaviors. Just to name a few, that number on the scale could change because your diet. It could change because physical activity. It could change because of taking medication. It could change because use of drugs, alcohol, tobacco. It could change because of sleep. It could change just because straight up measurement error. You step on 2 seconds later and it's different. It can change for many different reasons. And so my presentation will focus on how we change the behavior. And by changing the behavior, we hope that you can manage your weight. Now with that, I am not an expert in behaviors that support weight management. So I am not a clinician that can tell you what behaviors you should be doing to change your weight. And I'm not you, right? I think you are the best expert on yourself and what behaviors you decide to change to hopefully get to that outcome of managing your weight. That is entirely up to you and the people around you who support you. But what I can help you do is think about, once you know what that behavior is, how do we make sure you're doing it? I hope that helps with understanding what a behavior is. And maybe I'll stop for just a second if anyone has questions about what is a behavior versus an outcome. because it's important for us to be able to move forward. Anyone have questions? Yeah.
Somebody in the chat mentioned something about if it's not a behavior if a dead man can do it or something like that.
Oh, I've got to look at the chat. One,
I don't know what that quite means.
fasting, stopping elderly. If a dead man can do it, it's not a behavior. I'm not fully, I feel like there's a joke in there. I don't know if I fully understand it yet.
The meaning, I don't understand it either.
Yeah. I think essentially they're saying if you can't see someone actually physically moving, it's not a behavior. But also
that was
stopping.
me.
Hi,
That was me,
Alan.
Alan Miller in Victoria, BC. I studied did behavioral stuff when I was teaching school, and
Awesome.
you can't reinforce a person for fasting because they're not doing anything. If they're not drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes,
Yeah.
they're not doing anything. So you can't reinforce it. You can punish them
Yep.
for drinking and smoking cigarettes. So the test is if a dead person could do it, it's not a behavior because. So the problem with diet is we're stopping doing something. So how do we reinforce stopping doing something?
Yeah. Alan, you've hit on a really great point. So often when we think about behavior change, we think of two pieces. So either do you want to start doing a behavior? Well, maybe three. Do you want to keep doing something? You're already doing it and you want to maintain it. Or three, do you want to stop doing something, slow it down? And indeed, one of the more challenging pieces often is to slow something down, to stop something rather than adding something. And diet can be lots of different pieces. If we're thinking about diet, you might choose to add different things into your diet for health and well-being, or for many other reasons, joy. But you also might choose to take things away. So that makes it really challenging, absolutely. And we can look at what are those different things driving it. But at the end of the day, you are looking for something I can see you doing or not doing, right? If I can't see things happening, if it's something happening between your two ears or within your physiology, those aren't behaviors. And so often what I hear is people say, oh, I'm going to do a weight management intervention. And I go, oh, cool. What behavior are you changing? And they said, well, it's a weight management intervention. I go, okay, but what behavior are you changing? And they won't have told me because they haven't really thought. So they end up talking to people all about the importance of their weight, but never actually thinking about what behaviors that person wants to change to be able to maintain their weight, and why are the reasons they can't do that or can do that. Okay, I'll keep us moving forward on our murder mystery. So if we think about behavior and we come back to murder mystery, I want you to think about playing like the game of Clue. So in the game of Clue, we say that it was Mrs. Peacock with the lead pipe in the ballroom. The more specific you can get, the better the plan, the better we can identify the culprits and solve the crime for you. And this is because behaviors are context dependent. So whether I will go swimming in the middle of January in a lake versus whether I will go swimming in a backyard swimming pool in July, there are very different reasons stopping me from doing those two behaviors. So if you just say, I want to start swimming more for weight management, and then you say, well, why am I not doing that? And how do I do more of it? That's not as great as getting really specific. Why am I not swimming more at the Parkinson Recreation Center on Thursday nights in Kelowna, right? Well, because I've got XYZ going on, because the pool isn't accessible, because I don't have a friend to go with. So the more specific you can get about the behavior you want to change, the what, the when, the where, the how often, the better you'll be able to look at your behaviors. At the same time, I would also say if you're thinking about something like diet, things stopping you from being able to eat healthy at breakfast time may be very different than the things that are stopping you from being able to eat healthy at 9 p.m. at night. At 9 p.m. at night, if you're me, I am looking for my ice cream in the freezer. At 9 in the morning, it's usually about speed, right? 9 p.m. at night for me, it might be more around boredom. Whereas 9 a.m. in the morning, it's just trying to get out the door and motivated to eat as quickly as possible. So my reasons for doing what I'm doing are very context dependent. And so the more you can break down your behaviors into these smaller pieces, the better we can do. So that gets us to this first step of getting our magnifying glass up and looking at our behavior. Now in my detective kit, I want to show you the kind of key tool I keep with me when I'm thinking about behavior change. So when I'm thinking about behavior change, my key tool I bring with me always is behavior change theory. Behavior change theory is really important. It's essentially, without getting like too sciencey on a Friday night, it is a summary of everything behavioral science has learned over time. There are over 83 different theories of behavior and behavior change. They are like the recipe book. They tell us why people will change their behavior or why they won't. They tell us the mechanisms by which people change their behavior, and they can really help us understand the success or the failure of interventions. So for that reason, I usually say that behavior change theories are essentially like baking with a recipe, and baking without a recipe or supporting behavior change without theory is like baking without a recipe. So you might know where you want to go. You're like, I want to make this very yummy cookie thinking thing, but I have no recipe. And so you make an attempt at it, and what happens, right? You knew your end goal, but you don't understand why that end goal either succeeded or failed. So you might be really lucky and you come up with making something as perfect as this. You might not know how you got there. And maybe more importantly, if you failed without the recipe, you can't go back and figure out why you failed. So a behavior change theory is also valuable because behavior change theories are tested. So many researchers have gone out and been like, is this the recipe for behavior change? Is this the recipe for behavior change? And I would say, just like when you're baking, you want to bake with a tested recipe. So I would rather that you gave me the best chocolate chip cookie recipe. I'm wondering if people are going to go look this up now. For 8,653 reviews with a 4.6. Like, that sounds like a good route to go. We want to look for those same kind of theories when we're baking a recipe. So we want to pick the theory for interventions that have been tested on thousands of people and have been shown to be effective. So if we look at these different 83 theories of behavior and behavior change, some of them work pretty well some of the time. Some of them work pretty well most of the time. Some of them combine a lot of things. And that's the one I'm going to show you today. I'm going to show you the COM-B framework. This is a framework that was developed by Susan Mickey and colleagues at the University College London. It was used to summarize multiple theories. So the goal of this theory was to bring together tons of recipes. So imagine you're like the joy of cooking and you say, everyone that cooks chocolate chip cookies, bring them in, and we're going to see what the most best consistent method is for making chocolate chip cookies. Think about the COM-B framework like that. And it's been tested. It's a tested recipe for behavior change. The other reason I like it is it's really simple. So I'm going to show you this theory right now. And what we usually say about theory is they're boxes and lines. So you're going to see some boxes and some lines, but I actually want you to think about this theory as a recipe or the three culprits driving your behavior. So what this theory says is that in order for you to change your behavior, you need three key things. You need capability. So the psychological capability, you know what it is, and the physical capability, you can actually physically do whatever that behavior is. Opportunity. You need the physical opportunity, you need to have access to that thing, and you need to have the social opportunity. It's okay in your social circle to engage in that behavior. And then motivation. We say there's two kinds. There's reflective motivation. So you've weighed the pros, cons, and reflected, come to the idea that, yep, that's a good idea, as well as automatic motivation. Emotionally, habit-wise, cues, triggers, this sounds like a good idea to do, and it's quite natural for you. We need these three things to engage in behavior. And usually if behavior is not happening, you can figure out if it's one of these three things: capability, opportunity, or motivation. And if I go back to the misconceptions about behavior change that I talked to you about beforehand, is those misconceptions are essentially that people assumed you only needed one of these things, right? You just need to know how to do it. That means that you only thought capability drove behavior. You just need to really want to do it. You got to see the cost benefit and think it's great. Well, that's just motivation. Or, you know what? If we just give them a bike, they'll cycle. That's just opportunity. And funny enough, if we come back to our Friday night murder mystery, capability, opportunity, and motivation are the same three things the legal system uses when they decide whether you could have engaged in the behavior of committing a crime. So you can't commit a crime if you didn't have the capability, the opportunity, and the motivation. And I would say you can't engage in the behavior if you don't have the capability, the opportunity, or the motivation. So let's break these down a little more. So if we think about reflective motivation, that's me weighing the cost benefits, right? That's me thinking about, oh, am I capable of doing that? I think that's a good idea. There's some good thoughts to that. My automatic motivation is my feelings around that. So my feeling, my habit, my cues. So let's take my ice cream habit. Reflective motivation. I think that ice cream at 9 o'clock at night is probably going to make me feel really bad tomorrow morning, and probably isn't a good idea for my weight management goals at the moment. But my automatic motivation, my feelings are telling me the ice cream is going to make me feel really good right now. And I'm feeling tired and low energy, and I want to do this. So that's my automatic motivation driving that. And if I want to identify that culprit and do something about it, I have to be able to have a plan for what I'm going to do about my automatic motivation. Let's think about the idea of our psychological capability as well as our physical capability. So in terms of psychological capability, you might know how to drive a car. So you have gotten your, I think it's called your learners in BC, where you get your learner's license and you've written the test. So you, in theory, know how to drive a car. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the physical ability to drive a car. So up here, I have the doctor's report on commercial drivers with diabetes on insulin. You might not be allowed to drive a car because they're concerned about your physical ability to actually drive the car. These are two different types of capability. And depending on what's stopping me from driving a car, one of these two things might be the case. And then if we want to think about opportunity, then we want to think about, do I have the physical access to that? So if we think about the car, do I have a physical access to a car? Do I actually own one, or can I rent one? But in my social world, is it okay for me to drive a car? Or is my family supportive of me driving a car? Is my family supportive of me doing that, or my friends? And all of these things together interact on our behavior. So it might be that somebody gives you a car. Now, you've got the physical opportunity to drive the car. And that convinces you that maybe, actually, I need to improve my skills. I'm going to go learn about how to drive a car, and I'm going to make sure that I take some lessons as well, and address the issues around my diabetes. I might be a little scared of driving the car, but over time, my capability gets better. So that kind of goes away a little bit, and the cost benefits get better. So depending on where you start, you can come into this system in many different places. So these three culprits driving behavior: capability, opportunity, motivation. Who's the culprit? They all interact together. I can give you another example. Here's a behavior that can help with weight management. When I moved to the Okanagan, I had never skied before. That's a behavior. It's observable. You can see me. I think the term is yard sailing down the mountain. I was not good at it, and I was not skiing well. I didn't want to really go skiing at all. I did not have motivation because I was afraid. But then I moved to the Okanagan, and I had friends. I had a social environment that encouraged me to go skiing. And because I moved, I was closer to the physical opportunity of a mountain to go skiing. I also was no longer a grad student, so I could afford that, my actual resources. That convinced me to go and increase my capability, my actual psychological knowledge and physical skill to be able to ski. And those two things got me really excited about skiing and very motivated, to the point that I was skiing on a regular basis. So all of these things can interact. Now, if my skiing went badly, if I got injured, if something bad happened, that behavior, you can see the arrows going the other way, that behavior can affect my capability, my opportunity, my motivation. If I had a really bad fall or something scary happened, that would likely decrease my motivation. It might have broken my skis, taking away my opportunity, or it could have physically injured me, taking away my capability, and you wouldn't see me skiing anymore. So your goal with these elementary steps is to think to yourself, for that behavior, whatever it is, the Mrs. Peacock in the library, very clear behavior. What's stopping me from doing this? Is it my capability? Is it my opportunity? Or is it my motivation? Because that's going to drive how we actually solve the crime. Because if we don't have that answer, we can't solve the crime. I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has questions. Clear as mud? Yeah? Okay. So keep it going. Jocelyn or Terry, feel free to stop me if anyone needs anything. Okay. So step 3, let's solve this crime. There are 93 ways to solve the crime, just to really stress you out. So we call these our behavior change techniques, all the different ways that we can increase capability, opportunity, and motivation. 93 of them, also identified by Susan Mickey and her colleagues at University College London. if you want to think about these like a pantry or like a group, I think there's a lot of options. Some consistently work better than others. But what you want to do is try and pick techniques that would actually address the culprits. So you can actually go online and type in BCT taxonomy, and you can look at all 93 and see if you want to play around with different ones. But what I thought I would do is show you the staples today. Show you ones that consistently, when we look at behavior change interventions that tend to work, these are the ones that are almost always in there. They're also ones that I've seen used in some of our work around behavior change techniques that have been used to change diet. That doesn't mean that you can't get creative and do what works for you. But what I would say is think deeply when you decide on a technique to solve the crime. Is it addressing your culprit? If you are someone that is being stopped because of capability, don't go and get a technique that's going to increase your motivation. You might already be motivated. You don't need more motivation. You just need to learn how to do it. So don't waste your time. Make sure your technique is actually linked to the culprit that you've identified. Some key ones that we almost always see. So goal setting and smart behavioral goals. There's a couple reasons why this works. So goal setting is I'm going to quit smoking on this date at this time. I'm going to go exercising at this date at this time. I'm going to eat this thing for breakfast for this long, for this much, for this specific time. You want to make sure we say it's smart, it's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable and realistic, it's timely, right? These are very clear goals that are realistic for us to do. I wouldn't recommend going and trying to do an Ironman if you haven't exercised recently. That might not be a smart goal. But actually having a goal and knowing where you're going is really important for changing our behavior. And part of that is that we want to get as specific as possible about our behaviors. And with that, we want to make a plan for when and how we're going to do those behaviors. That's what action planning is. Action planning is getting in your calendar and really writing out what are you going to do. What it does is it makes you think in advance about what you're doing. It also makes you look at some of your barriers. What's it going to take to get you there? Coping planning is a kind of flip of that. It's what's going to stop me and how am I going to get around that? So coping planning is at 9 o'clock, I'm really going to want the ice cream in my freezer. Instead, what I'm going to do is, so it's making a plan for how I'm going to cope. So instead, what I'm going to do is go for a walk. With the difference being that coping planning is organized ahead of time so that you're not in that moment with those emotions. You're not standing in front of the freezer going, I don't know what to do. You've thought about ahead of time that when I get that craving for a cigarette, I'm going to call my friend. When I get that craving for ice cream, I'm going to brush my teeth. Something different. Self-monitoring. Self-monitoring is one that we see in almost all behavior change interventions, like so many of them. Incredibly effective. You can look at what you're eating, your macros, how much physical activity you're doing, whether or not you've maintained stopping doing something over time. It lets you see your success, which gives you motivation, but it also lets you see how things are going and get very realistic about what's working and what's not working. In particular, around weight and diet, you really see self-monitoring as a specific tool, and you'll see this with apps and things like that. Behavioral practice and rehearsal, actually practicing something, learning from it, trying again. So I'll practice tonight around how I'm going to handle the ice cream. It might not go well, but we'll learn. Social support. The people around you, that social opportunity really, really, really matter. If people around you aren't supporting you, it's very hard for you to change because you are essentially swimming upstream. So having that social support. And then information about health consequences or just the consequences of that behavior, making sure you do know the cost benefits, because we are rational sometimes and we are irrational sometimes. Now, you might look at some of these different techniques and say, those aren't for me. I don't like doing certain things. I don't want to be part of that. So any of the techniques you're thinking about, any way you're thinking about doing it, I would encourage you to get creative and think about whether or not these techniques appease you. Do you like them? So is that technique affordable for you? If you're going to get an app that tracks everything you eat or every physical activity, you're going to buy a new Fitbit, can you actually afford that? Is something you can afford over time? Is it practical for you? If you want to use a Fitbit, do you actually really want to use a Fitbit? Can it track if you're using a manual wheelchair? Is that something that makes sense for you and your life? Is a personal trainer something that is affordable or practical for you? Do you think that it's effective? Is there data to say that this is a good behavior for you to change or technique for you to use? And also, is it acceptable to you? And I would tie that to these other three things. Is it acceptable to you? Side effects and safety, and ethics. For example, for some people, self-monitoring is not for them. It gets them really in their head. It gets them very concerned about tracking every little thing, and it can make them frustrated or upset. Maybe it's not for them. For many people, it works really, really well. But you have to find the interventions that work for you. So thinking really deeply about what works and what doesn't. That gets us to reviewing the case. So when you change your behavior, it will work sometimes and it will often not work. And that is okay. So I think we think, oh, I failed at this quit attempt. I failed at this weight management strategy. Many people who quit smoking have to try quitting smoking several times before it sticks. And that's okay, because every attempt is actually a chance to learn. So just like in a murder mystery, you might go back and write the case down and look about what worked and what didn't. Is there a new behavior you want to change? Are there new barriers that you've identified? So you've actually dealt with your capability problem, but now you realize, ooh, there's a motivation culprit going on here and I need to change things. Did you really not like that technique and you don't want to ever do it again? Is there a different technique that you could use? Whatever you choose to do, learn from it, and please try to do that with as much compassion and self-compassion as possible. What we know is that when people are really hard on themselves, when they're trying to change their behavior, and they look at it with very all or nothing thinking, it was a success or a failure, and they don't let themselves see the gray, it's very hard for them to come back from it. We need you to give yourself compassion and self-compassion. Celebrate the success of trying and be very aware of the what the heck effect. So what is the what the heck effect? I make this plan that I'm not going to go and eat my ice cream in my freezer tonight at 9 o'clock. And I get to the freezer and I go, just a spoon. And I have a spoon. And then I have another spoon. And I decide I've failed. I failed at my plan. And so I go, what the heck? I might as well eat the whole pint. Instead of stopping, thinking about my behavior, learning from it, giving myself some self-compassion and trying again tomorrow. That I don't need to entirely give up just because it didn't work today. So being kind with the what the heck effect. So with that, I hope that I've given you a tour, a murder mystery tour of how you can use science to change your behavior, those misconceptions that sometimes get us in trouble, the tools of capability, opportunity, motivation, and then really how we solve the crime and review the case. And I thought that our last step here is for me to ask, how could you apply these tools to help change your own behavior? And really, maybe we come back to the initial question that I asked SCIBC, which is, how can I help? So if there's ways that you want to have a discussion, or there's ways that I can help SCIBC think about weight management or how we use behavior change, I'm absolutely here to do that. There's lots of people that make this research possible, that make the work I do possible. I'm very lucky to have an incredible team of trainees, partners, and research collaborators, of which Terry and Jocelyn have been incredible along the way. And if you want to get in touch with me, these are all the different ways you can link up with me, and we can chat further. So I'll stop sharing and see if there's questions.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was an excellent presentation. And I invite our audience to show your appreciation in whatever way Zoom will let you. And we really appreciate your, I love the sort of crime fighting detective kit.
Friday night.
Yeah, right. It was like a whodunit.
Yeah.
We have some, I'm sure we have some questions, but so a question that I have is I was interested to see how the behavior feeds back to the motivation, opportunity, and capability. And sometimes that's what I feel like I struggle the most with, is that it doesn't go as well as I thought, or it was too much trouble, and I have trouble getting back from that negative experience to the replanning or whatever, going back through the system. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions or observations about getting back on the horse.
Yeah, that's normal. I think that's a really common occurrence when we're trying to change your behavior. It's interesting when you ask people that have never done whatever the behavior before is, and you ask them how confident they are that they can do it. They often tell you they're really, really confident. And then when you get them doing it and then you ask them again, their confidence usually goes down, not necessarily up. And it's because we perceive things often to be easier than they actually are. And so that experience of the behavior then changes how motivated we are to want to continue, because it's hard. So with that, it's thinking about, is there a way to adjust the behavior to increase your confidence? So could we make that a more realistic goal? Could we make it smaller? Can we set essentially a graded approach to doing that? That you don't go out and do the Ironman. Maybe you had planned on 10 minutes, maybe it's 5 minutes. Maybe you wanted to change your entire diet. Maybe we're just dealing with breakfast. Maybe you want to change a whole bunch of different food groups. Maybe it's just these 3 food groups until you get success, because success will help increase your confidence. It will help increase your motivation. So the more positive we can make that first experience, I would say, the better. There will always be somebody that is like the diehard, goes out really hard and gets super motivated off of that. But in general, we want to set you up for success. And if we don't, so much self-compassion, like really that self-compassion piece of trying is huge in and of itself. And I think that's something we're really hard on ourselves about, that we should be so good at changing behavior when actually it's really hard to change your behavior. Does that help, Jocelyn?
Yeah, for sure. It's I think the striving for a success, maybe not exactly perfect or the success you were going for, but any
progress,
success.
like progress, not perfection or something is what my grads.
Yeah, progress, not perfection. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like progress, not perfection.
Yeah, for sure. It looks like Angie has a question.
Hello.
Hello, Angie.
Hi. One time I heard about it was not exactly about habit changing, It was about adopting something new, and
Mm.
it was practices. In this case, it was practices around. I don't remember the details, but something about resilience. And the suggestion was to attach it to something you do every day.
Mhm.
Or maybe it was mindfulness, something like that.
Yeah.
The idea was that when you go to brush your teeth, you kind of combine that with like a few moments of deep breathing or whatever it was, so that it was, I guess I'm looking for your opinion or any information you have about changing habits in a way that if it's something you want to do, but you don't make a very concrete action plan, attaching it to something that you would do anyway every day, and if that could help.
Yep. Okay. So let's think about this as, well, let's do your mindfulness example. And let's say that you already have capability. So you know about mindfulness, you know how to do it. You're both the psychological and the physical skill mindfulness. You're like, yep, I've taken some courses. I know what I'm doing. Opportunity in terms of like, I don't have a lot of time, but you know what? I have time after I brush my teeth in the morning, or I have time at this other time, and like nobody's judging you. It's great that you're doing mindfulness. So we've got capability and opportunity. It sounds like you think that mindfulness is a good thing to do. So we have reflective motivation. And then it sounds like what's missing is automatic motivation. This idea that you remember, that you can remember to do it, and that there's no negative emotions or things getting in the way. So if it's memory that is the issue, absolutely tie it to a cue, right? Tie it to something that if this, then that. So that's called an implementation intention. They're very effective, in particular when you can't remember to do something, or it's something you need to do repetitively all the time. So if I am brushing my teeth, then I will do this.
Mhm.
The more you can write that out and like make a plan of it, that you're like, I will always do this. If this, then that. If this, then that. Absolutely. Only though, I would say, or like with caution, that your culprit is automatic motivation in that case. Because if you said to me, I've been trying to do this if this, then that thing, but every time I try to go and do it, I don't have enough time. And I would say, oh, you're trying to do automatic motivation technique for a physical opportunity problem. And that's why it's not working, right? And so I would say that's a great idea if automatic motivation is the concern. Make sense?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard of it before, right? You just get to the end of the day and you go, oh, I really had good intentions about that thing.
And there is some data that and it goes back and forth, but that we can regulate our behavior sometimes earlier in the day. Right? Like you get tired. It gets harder to do things over the day. Like
Right.
I watch my kids, they're way easier earlier in the morning. But yes, there is some data to say that sometimes it is easier in the morning, but I think that also depends on you, right? Like for many people, it may be easier. You might be someone who has more energy at a different time of day.
Right. Okay, thanks very much.
Does that help?
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
Any other questions? I have another one.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so once you've identified something that worked for you, maybe you've put all those motivation, capability, opportunity together, and you find something that kind of really works. Is there like a time limit or number of repetitions that really determines whether it'll stick? Like how do you know when you get there? Is there some like magic?
This is hotly debated in behavioral science. So there are some people that say, oh, what is it? The number of days it takes to do a habit. That those number of days were actually sort of pulled out of like an average across all these people. So like everyone didn't make a habit on a certain day. Like some people were way more and some people were way less. And this was the average number. I would actually say for everyone, it's a little bit different. There is a little bit of a theory around 6 months, that when people are doing things for 6 months, that's quite a maintenance. Anything really consistent, I'm always impressed with. You'll find life events or big changes in schedule are huge things that make it hard for maintenance. So I actually think the thing I would think more about maintenance is doing coping planning. What's going to stop me? So let's think about weight management, and say you're doing nutrition right now, like you're thinking about your food. And maybe it's like you can maintain eating really well until October 31st and 2 weeks in December that are some festive fun times. Because a little tiny chocolate bar is a challenge in life. And so like thinking about those things of like, all right, to maintain this behavior long-term, what do I need to think about? How am I going to handle that? Because that is different than my day-to-day, right? Like I can handle the day-to-day, but what does this look like on Halloween? What does this look like in like those festive seasons when we have a lot of dinners that maybe I don't get to decide when I'm eating? What's my plan for that? And having a plan in advance for those things, I think is really important. But I would say there's points when behavior becomes more automatic, something you don't need to think about as much, and then easier to maintain. And the other way behavior becomes really easy to maintain is when it's joyful. So intrinsic behavior, intrinsically motivated, joyful behavior. If you can find something you love, it's easier to do, right? So have a think about that of like, if you're changing your diet and it's awful and you're like, I could do this for 3 weeks, but I don't know if I could do it longer. Is this the diet that's right for you right now? If you only need to maintain it, like you've talked to your medical professional and it's something you're only maintaining for a short amount of time, great. If this is your life for the rest of your life, are you okay with that? Because if you're not joyful with it, you probably won't stick with it, because we stick with things we're more joyful for.
Interesting. It's funny that you say coping planning, because we had that exact situation at our house. My husband came home with the little box of the fun size bars for Halloween. And I have a rule. Those, if they are in the house, they have to be somewhere I can't see them, because I can't be responsible for that. They're too easy. They're just
too easy.
I like chocolate, but it's the convenience of it is too easy. I'll end up eating the chocolate bars instead of the good food in my fridge.
Yeah.
And that's how I choose to help myself, is to make the food in the fridge the easiest option.
The physical opportunity. You can't have that opportunity in front of you. And you also, actually, Jocelyn, you hit on another thing, which I probably should also mention. People always talk to me about motivation. I'm really motivated to eat healthy. Fantastic. Are you more motivated to eat the candy? Yup. Right? So when we talk about motivation, you're not usually just talking about one behavior, you're talking about many. Because every time you make a choice to do something, you are also making a choice to not do a bunch of things, right? So tonight I could go and exercise. I could go out with friends. I could watch a movie. I could go to bed early. I could bake. I'm only going to pick one of those things, right? And it's not that I like all of those things. And if you ask me if I'm motivated to do them, yeah, but I'm motivated to do one more than the other. And it's trying to think about those things too, making the trade-offs not as painful.
Definitely. Thanks. Any other questions, anybody? Jolene.
I have a question, rather on something that Heather just said, is about motivation and joy. So So for some of the things that I think people with spinal cord injuries can identify with is that some of the things that we have to do, that we must do, are not comfortable. You know, they're painful,
Yeah.
and they're necessary to do with our lives. And so I'm just going to give an example I think many people can identify with is gabapentin and baclofen are weight. I mean, for many of us, we gain weight on them. And no, it's not comfortable. It's not joyful living on a diet of less than 1,200 calories a day. And there isn't. So when you spoke about finding joy in what we're doing, for I think most of us can identify with that. For example, we realize we need physical activity in our lives, but for a number of us, it's painful. And so we do these things for motivation because we need to for our lives. You know, it's so it's I guess my question is that what can we as people with spinal cord injuries look to motivation for besides that joy that you're speaking about, you know, that thrill of flying endlessly without pain, without problem, without fear of skiing downhill.
Yeah.
You know, where we know that if we're not very careful, if we crash, it's not just a simple broken leg or this or that, or that we cannot, no matter how much we'd like to, pig out on Christmas Day dinner. We just can't, because guess what? We have bowel management problems. You know,
Yeah.
we can't. And so the same way with alcohol. I mean, we just can't go out on a Saturday night and party. So on these behavioral changes that I think we all recognize that we need to do them, but we have that extra little hurdle, that extra little barrier that we have to. So I'm asking what recommendations that you would have for people with spinal cord injuries when we have to deal with something, but guess what? We're just not going to get that bit of joy. It's just not available in the package we live in.
Yeah,
But the
absolutely.
chocolate bar is for me.
Fantastic question. And I'm going to lean on Jocelyn and Terry as well on this. So I'll give a bit of theory, and then I'm hoping Jocelyn and Terry, because I don't have lived experience of spinal cord injury. I just have many, many friends with spinal cord injury. But so what I would say is not all motivation can be joyful. There are things that we have to do in our lives to live our lives that are not joyful. And those things are motivated often by rational choice, right? Cost benefit, exactly what you said. I can't go out drinking because the costs are too high. Like, I could do it, but it's a mess and it's not worth it. So you're leaning very much on cost benefit. And in those cases, if we think about other kinds of motivation when joy isn't really an option, we can lean into persuasion. So we can lean into telling ourselves the benefits, getting really clear and having a plan. So very much leaning into that reflective motivation, which is not so fun. But what I would try to add to that, and usually what I often do, is lean into incentives for myself that are joyful for me, but are not that behavior. If I do this, then I get to do this. If I do this, then I can do this. Finding something for myself or for yourself that is joyful, that's not necessarily tied to that behavior, but letting that tie happen, the if then, right? So that you can find some joy. And you can certainly have incentives that are just like, Halloween candies, but I don't think that's the way you want to go. But there are probably some incentives that that you could maybe think about. And then the other piece of is being honest with yourself and giving yourself some compassion that this is hard. This is not something I feel joyful about. This is unpleasant. And the fact that I'm doing it or even trying is a huge success, because this isn't as easy as a joyful behavior. Joyful behaviors are easier. Jocelyn, Terry, can you help me with that?
Well, it sure resonates for me. Jillian, when you were talking, it reminded me of when it was in my 20s, I like very suddenly developed neuropathic pain, like almost overnight. And, it took like 2 years to get properly diagnosed and to get therapies and try everything. And I, of course, it was a big change in my life. I was not very happy about it, and my life was not very happy. And but I was trying to be a grown-up adult and look after myself and get somewhere with myself. And but every 3 months I had to go back to the pain clinic and get my pump refilled. That was like how I was managing my pain. And it involved an injection. It was not super painful itself, but it was not a fun experience. It was a lot of waiting and sitting and talking to doctors and stuff. So I just developed this routine after a while. And the routine was I would go around the corner, because it was at St. Paul's, and right around the corner, there's a Starbucks on Davie Street. And I would have a little coffee, just me and myself in the coffee shop, and have my little coffee once it was done. Because then it felt like I was downtown for my own reasons, for fun or whatever, along with the cool people instead of at the hospital. And, it did a lot of things for me, but I think it gave me a little bit of like enough little me time. And that was the reward that was meaningful for me at the time. But I certainly have also been a person who's been like, if I get out and like, I have one of those Apple watches, and so it gives me little rewards, like, this is, you exercised your full bar 3 times this month. Yay for you. Which, if I was writing that on paper, I'd be like, that's 3 times. Come on, that's not good enough. But my watch is like, wait, that's more than last month. Awesome. Good for you. So I have been known to like a gold star every once in a while, a little pat on the head. So what about you, Terry?
Oh, I struggle all the time myself because, well, now that I have neuropathic pain, also got it, I'm not exercising anymore. So I'm trying different things, to work, to do some activity, but my body has to be in a certain position in order for my pain not to flare up, which is literally straight up and down. So how do you actually get a good workout if you're like 90 degrees all the time, right? And I get way too much joy in eating out and drinking wine. And it is not good. I know it's not good for me. I have not been able to do anything, but in the past, and what I know of myself, I do really like socializing with people. So if I think I tied it to social events where we were all aligned together, right? So one night I'm not going to have a glass of wine and everybody else is on board, and we're just going to meet up together and do it together for like an hour or whatever, and then I'll go to bed. But similarly to like meeting up, and doing something with someone that's maybe an activity, right? For me, because I'm a social person, that would be like a bit of a payoff for me, right? So I don't know, it's a real struggle, and all the things that I should do, I have not found joy in them yet.
Yeah, and that's some behaviors are hard, right? And lying to ourselves that we should love them, I don't know. You can tell me what you think, Jolene, but I think give yourself compassion that this is hard, right? This is not easy. And with that, it is going to require a lot of reflective, like, you got to see the benefit of it, because why on earth would we do it? And then I would lean on that social support, the people around you encouraging you and helping you with those moments, because it's unpleasant, right? Like, nobody wants to do unpleasant things. Yeah. Does that
Thanks
help?
so much for that.
Yeah.
We have a question from Jeff. And
I have a question, and it goes around diabetes. I just decided that who cares? I've got so much going on. I'm not going to do it anymore. Just who cares? And I moved here where I am now into complex care, and I had no education. So my thought and theory was to learn how to manage your sugars. But if I did it every day, I was going to fail. So is it good to start slow and then work up? Because that was my biggest problem.
Yeah.
Like, if you go full out, you're going to cheat, right?
Yep.
But
what a good question. So specific to diabetes, I'm not an expert on diabetes, so I can't necessarily say how starting slow or like going back and forth would affect blood sugars. But what I can say from a behavioral science perspective is starting slow, getting success, starting slow, getting success gives you a sense of mastery. It gives you that sense of like, okay, here's the next step. It's not so big. And that theoretically makes a lot of good sense to try and do. On the reverse side of that, there are people that find that a quit date or like a specific date of after this, do not pass, works. Like, so we see that in smoking cessation, you're more likely to quit smoking if you set a quit date and that is your date. If at that quit date, you have all of your supports in place. So you have the things to help you do that. So I would say if you're going to do the cold turkey approach, make sure you've done a lot of like thinking, getting yourself well supported for the cold turkey day versus the setting things slowly and letting yourself learn from that, like taking baby steps. Okay, I've got to do this. Now I've got to add that. That makes a lot of sense. It's going to let you learn, make some changes. Why not try both? Because if try one, if that doesn't work, try the other way. Because remember that every chance at behavior change is just a chance to put another case in the case book. It's not a failure. It is not the reason to stop at all. It's the reason to go, what happened there? Can I learn from this? Yeah. So those would be my two pieces.
So basically what you're saying is sometimes you have to unlearn the habit.
Yeah.
The bad habit.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You got to figure out what's going on for you.
Right.
And understand what's going on from you. And doing things in small steps can help you do that.
And then look at like a reasonable reward, like maybe a can of soda water.
Something that for you is meaningful, makes you want to do that if motivation is the issue. Right? If you're like, I've got my opportunity, I've got my capability, I'm just not motivated, you might need an incentive. You might need to think of the cost benefits. You might need to get some momentum.
And then the other thing I found that I don't like, I hate medical appointments.
Oh,
it's like, oh, not again.
Yeah.
Another 4 hours at KGH. And so if I can have my diabetes under control and my sugars under control, then I'm happy enough to go and do that because I know that it's needed.
Yeah, exactly. It's like finding that, it's what Jocelyn was saying, finding the
balance
benefit of this really awful moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that great question. Patty, we have time for about 5 minutes. So if you got a brief question, go for it.
Yeah, it wasn't a question. I was just going to share a few things that I have found when I was successful.
Awesome.
in quitting smoking
Yeah.
was yes, a due date. Another one was making a bet. It was also letting everybody else know what you were doing, what I was doing. So
Accountability.
yeah, the more I kept it a secret that I was quitting smoking, which I kind of wanted to do at the beginning because I thought, well, what if I fail? Then, yeah, it's accountability, exactly. And then the other thing I found helpful too for in the past, because I sort of go up and down, like at Christmas, I will gain weight. Sometimes during the summer because ice cream and good weather and good food and everything. So I find, okay, I noticed 2 pounds, 1 or 2 pounds. I noticed it during a transfer. So I just imagine me transferring so much easier. And sort of that's my big picture. So it's almost like we have to make a big positive, big picture of our goal. Like what is going to be good for us? Like what's going to be a little joyful for us, like at the end of this, right?
And what is meaningful to you as Patty, and not necessarily what is meaningful to me as, and like that's one of the challenges is often interventions designed for people with spinal cord injury have been designed for by people without spinal cord injury, and then people without spinal cord injury tell you all the benefits we think you should care about. When Patty, like, transferring, that is a huge benefit of spinal cord, like to someone with spinal cord injury, of why we would think about weight management, that it's meaningful to you. And I think that's the key thing, is this one size intervention, we need it to be tailored to us.
That's a really good point. It reminds me too of, it's a much bigger question, but the difference between a fear motivator and a non-fear, like a joyful motivator. Because I remember like a very common thing the OTs at GF always say, it's, oh, your shoulders are gonna have to drag the rest of you around forever, you better take care of them, or with pressure injuries, and you better watch out. And I totally get that, and because it is a kind of, both of those are very bad outcomes. You do want to avoid that, but I think getting to a point where you feel prepared and you have a plan and you have the resources you need, and they can become a motivator because you enjoy the life you have and you want it to stay that way, and or you want to go on a cruise or go, do a thing that you enjoy, and kind of recasting those fear motivations more in the, like, how you do it.
Fear only works well as a motivator when it is very clearly tied to what you can do to avoid the risk. If it's not really clear of like, how am I going to avoid that risk? So when someone scares you with like your shoulders or whatever, if they're not really clear about what you're going to do to avoid that happening, often what happens is the ostrich effect. We put our heads in the sand, we ignore it, and we do nothing. So fear has to be like we call them fear appeals in behavioral science. They have to be used with so much caution. To come with the same caution. So great point, Jocelyn.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Heather. That was lovely. It was some good conversation too, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the awesome questions. What a fun thing to talk about on a Friday night. Great.